Greetings, everyone. This is Anthony Reeves, and this is your Legal Beat Tip. I got a very interesting question today asking me about how far back your medical records go, and I'm glad that I had the opportunity to get that question because this gives me a chance right now to kind of cover that in some detail. When you are applying for Social Security disability benefits, one of the things they ask you is at what point your disability prevented you from being able to work. That date is affectionately referred to as your onset date or your alleged onset date of disability. Now, sometimes people ask the question, well, when they ask for records, how far back when they go? Well, there's really no simple answer, so I'm going to give you the stock attorney answer. It depends. Let's give you a couple of scenarios, and maybe that will help you out a little bit. First of all, it depends on the application. So, for instance, let's say you applied for SSI, Supplemental Security Income Disability Benefits, and for purposes, you applied on January 1st of this year. Okay. In theory, depending on what dates you tell them, they can go back as far as possible. Now, they're going to ask for those records. So, let's say, for instance, you say you became disabled January 1st of 2000. So, that's 11 years worth of medical records. Are they going to go for 11 years? Well, you said that's where your disability began. So, it's very possible that they'll go back that far. Now, keep in mind, let's say there's some things in between there. Meaning, what do you mean by things? Well, let's say you worked for 3 or 4 of those years. Well, some of those years may not be relevant if by some reason you worked during that time period where you made so much money you were above the threshold for Social Security. That's one thing to keep in mind. Second of all, I'm not saying this happens a lot, but sometimes Social Security will look at your application and they'll think about it like this. They'll ask for those records, but if you have a supplemental security income application, SSI, the date that's relevant is the date of your application because that's the date you can only get paid from. So I hope that makes sense to you. Now, here's the other thing, and this is where the other program is called Disability Insurance Benefits or DIB. That's one where when you apply, you can get disability benefits up to a year before the date of the application. Now, all these are nice bells and whistles, but here's probably the best way for me to break it down in terms of your medical records. When Social Security is asking you when you became disabled, they're going to use the date you say your condition prevents you from being able to work on a full time basis, which is your alleged onset date, is the date of reference for purposes of getting medical records. For kids, they'll ask you at what point do you determine your child is disabled. A lot of times parents put from birth, so they get records from that all the way to the present. Now, here's where it gets a little tricky because sometimes when I'm talking to my clients and they're asking about it, I tell them keep a couple of things in mind. For instance, if you have an SSI application, I'll mention to clients and I'll tell them. I said you might want to amend your onset date, and amending it means change it to the day you apply. And some people are like, why am I gonna do that? I said, well, let's look at it from a realistic standpoint. You're gonna ask a judge to review 11 years worth of medical evidence when you can only get paid from the beginning of this year. Now wrap your brain around that for a second. That's almost like making somebody run 2 miles for the 100-yard dash. You understand what I'm saying? So if you know that you're running a 100-yard dash, but you're going to make somebody run 2 miles before they actually started running to that dash, it doesn't make any sense. So now, let me make sure I back it up a second because I don't want people running out there talking about I'm gonna change my onset date. That's not what it's relative to your medical condition. If you have a medical condition that has medical evidence that supports that condition leading up to that date, sometimes that information is extremely useful. So it depends on your condition. It depends on how much medical treatment because it's kind of weird if you applied today and let's say you applied like January 1st of 2010. Well, if you haven't been to a doctor very often, but you became disabled back in 2000, you may need some of those older records to demonstrate the existence of your medical condition. Same rule applies with disability insurance benefits. If you applied today, which is let's say January 25th, 2011, and you indicated you became disabled back on January 1st, 2010, then they're going to only go back that far. But they can look at records before then. I stress this because sometimes people stress about the fact that they worry that if you don't get those records from way back in the day, You're going to not have an accurate picture of your condition. Let's also keep another thing in its proper perspective. You should be focusing on the medical records that demonstrates you're unable to work. This is not a kitchen sink, people. So nobody wants to know about when you had a cold back in 1985. Nobody wants to know about when you stubbed your toe in 1993. If you've got a broken foot and your toe was part of the problem back then, that might be relevant. If you have a chronic bronchial condition that goes way back then, that might be relevant. But keep in mind, if let's say you were working on a full time basis, if you're working on a full time basis all the way up until 2000 or 2005, then having those records for background doesn't really serve a whole lot of purpose. I know this is probably giving you a lot more information than you need. Medical records and how far back is tricky. It's really relative to the type of application you have, when you say you became disabled, the period of time it's covering, and whether or not those records are relevant. Keep in mind, the relevance is medical records to demonstrate that your condition prevented you from being able to do work as you used to do, which is within the last 15 years, or any other work in the national economy. This is not an opportunity for you to play kitchen sink or fill in the blank with everything under the sun. And I hope you understand that when you're sitting there talking about, oh, I remember I had a sneeze attack that lasted 2 days back in January 3rd, 1994. I think those records are relevant. Maybe not, maybe not. So keep those things in the back of your mind. And more importantly, if you have a representative, people, if you have an attorney or a non attorney rep, ask them about the relevance of those records, because they're going to want to know ahead of time why you think those records are relevant. Because if they need to go get them, they need to know, is it going to be useful? Because getting something that doesn't serve any purpose based on the period of time is not really helping your case. And more importantly, you can get them to give you an understanding as to why those records are or are not relevant. This is Attorney Anthony Reeves. It's my pleasure having you on again here. Of course, if you want to find out more, you can check my blog out at legalbeat.anthonyreeves.com. You can always hit me up at hit me up at www.reevesfirm.com. And as always, you can always put comments or send me emails right here on YouTube. I read them all and I make a point to post videos in accordance. I look forward to hearing from you. Have a wonderful day.